Okay, so now we're just going to continue to do what we've been doing. So I'm just going to kind of reiterate some of the steps that I'm doing as I look at this. Ultimately, I'm just trying to create more dimensional forms at the end of the day. So each area I address, I'm thinking about where the light might hit, the way it might cast a shadow. Is it specular? Is it diffused lighting? Is it in shadow altogether? And then I'm basically just poking around at it, okay? And that means like, using whether I use a soft brush or the pencil brush at a low opacity, and then I decide to blend it. But the main thing is all of this is being done off of one layer. So it's forcing me, or maybe just encouraging me, but it's encouraging me to utilize what I know about how to edit the work. Now I can obviously add a layer and merge it down like we've talked about previously, but I'm trying to really stay away from that. In this particular example, in this set of lessons, I want you to see that there's just a lot you can do with just one layer. And if you're using values and you're not having to worry about color yet, then it becomes pretty easy to just go back and forth, from light to dark. Now, obviously, not just light to dark, you've got a value range. You want to try to stay in the medium tones as much as possible. I think I probably even went a little bit dark on some of this. But try to stay in the middle. Try to use absolute white and absolute black more either towards the end or more for focal points or extreme circumstances. So it becomes a bad habit to basically use those just because they work really well. It's like they're very effective. So you can see as I add the light on that spiked ball, it's too much. It's overdone. So I'll need to actually blend that back or paint that back or maybe even fix that in the color stage. But again, it's very easy to want to overuse them because they're so dominant. They're so effective or so almost like eye candy. You put them in there and they jump, they pop. So that's why you have to actually use those at the very end, the whites of the eyes, or you got a really deep shadow and you're really trying to push a part of the character design off the page. Then maybe use some of that strong line weight or shading for that. But really try to reserve yourself because again, it's almost or it is a bad habit to get into. So you see there, I'll still edit the shapes here and there. I will manipulate it as need be. But essentially, I'm just staying within those inner areas and continuing to darken up some things, bouncing back and forth from the soft brush and the hard brush. And you see there, I'm kind of going over the whole thing with multiply, which remember, the multiply blending mode or combined mode, depending on the software you're using, is going to darken everything. So it's going to darken your highlights and it's going to darken your shadows. So it's good to be aware of that because it's not like normal mode, where normal mode, if you're using, say, a medium gray, you're going to wash out some of your black and you're going to darken some of your whites. With that, it's going to basically turn anything beneath it into a medium gray, and the more opacity you add over it, the more that's going to take effect. So you see here, I'm just trying to fix little elements of it. So this is kind of an area where I look like, or I think that I'm basically sculpting, right? So I'm selecting an area of the paintwork. I'm selecting the neighboring color by holding Alt, and I'm working with more of an opaque brush, and I'm basically sculpting the shapes. And then I utilize the ability to just flip part of it and distort it into place, and then merge that down. So again, I'm going to take every kind of shortcut in a sense and every kind of edit that I can because we're just working off pretty much that one layer, even though this is actually a floating shape until I merge it down. But I really think it's important to try this technique for speed. So even though this whole character production still probably took me, I don't know, 3-4 hours in total, it still seems like a lot, but at the same time, there's been times I've spent 12 hours on a digital painting or whatever. So in regards to that and the amount of detail we're adding, it's really not that bad. But it's the idea that you can really take this effect and you can generate a lot of different various characters. So you see with those silhouettes we started with, we could paint those in the same way, And I can pretty much guarantee you that each study you do after the first one is only going to get faster. You're going to find what works, what doesn't. You're going to find quicker ways to implement an effect. Like, for instance, there's even a few areas within this illustration where I was using the smooth watercolor brush. And I basically just wanted to showcase it for you because it is an amazing brush. But then there's certain areas where I just noticed it was faster to use the hard pencil brush with the light opacity and then smudge it, because one of the things about this program is the smudging is just really fast. It really, and you know, you got your blur brush as well, which is extremely effective. So, you know, as you do that, you're just going to say, oh, okay, well, I've got the skin right. And then you're going to go through and paint all the skin because you're kind of in that mode of what looks good for the skin, the right amount of, you know, rounded shadows or soft shadows combined with hard shadows, whatever, just the right amount of texture. And then you're going to implement that into each area of the character. And then you'll move on to the next material. So some of it is like kind of figuring out that workflow for each area. And then ultimately, the more of these characters you do, the more that, you know, you just carry that to the next character design. And then, like I kind of mentioned with the silhouettes previous in these lessons, you start to realize that a lot of this you can kind of reuse. And for conceptual design, I think that's huge because some of this isn't always going to make it to the end result. Depends on what you're working for what particular client. And again, if this was a piece that was going to be for print media, then I probably would have spent even more time refining and adding more texture and detail. But some of it just doesn't get seen in the end result. So I face that with storyboards a lot. And if that's the case and you know that going into a project, why not reutilize your own work? It just makes a lot of sense. It gets the client their work quicker. And you'll notice that as you do more and more of this, you get better and better at utilizing something, but it doesn't show up in the end result. It doesn't look like you reused anything. So, you know, because a lot of this is you know, especially when you start studying the values, you realize that a lot of this is just overlay of texture and brush strokes and mark making. So it doesn't really hurt, you know, the end result to, you know, work some of that in. So just make good use of your efforts, you know, try to save yourself time, and then notice that a lot of this is just an overlapping of textures. So as I scribble some texture in, I change the brush size, I go back from light to dark, I add little highlights. It's nothing too hard to really accomplish. It's not hard at all. It's just basically being okay with overlapping things. I think a big part of painting too is not expecting to see the right thing too soon. I think this applies to all art really, but definitely with painting, you have to allow it to build up and work up, and that's how texture works. So you can't, you know, put down a few marks and then get frustrated why it's not looking right yet. That's why I kind of stressed earlier that sometimes it's nice to be okay with the messiness of it all and allow it to be messy, because that buildup of that messy texture is sometimes going to give you some really good ideas for what to do next. But it's not going to happen if you get flustered and you think that every line needs to be pristine and correctly placed and things like that. So let's go ahead and wrap up right here. Head over to the next video and continue to refine this artwork.